What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be going over the Stamina Nightblade. So the Stamina Nightblade has definitely seen a fall from grace. It is no longer the top DPS. Now its spot has now been taken by the Stamina Necromancers, but Stamina Nightblade is still no slouch when it comes to DPS, falling probably second in line when it comes to overall raw DPS. The Stamina Necromancer is really only on top because of their very high major vulnerability, their new buff. I should say debuff there, but Stamina Necromancers do have the kind of disadvantage of having overall lower sustain even if you're running regen food or even a parse food. So Nightblades don't really have that big of a sustain issue, so in that regards, even though you are eating a little bit of a DPS loss, Nightblades don't really have to worry too much about sustain, so you might want to consider running them instead of a Necromancer, even though Necromancers have a higher potential ceiling. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we're going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We're talking about some alternative sets you might want to pick up if you do not have access to certain DLCs or certain expansions to get these sets, or if you're still farming for these ideal sets here. And then we'll be going over a 6-1 dummy parse to kind of go over the rotation, kind of how you want to approach your rotation. And then we'll do a 21 million dummy parse so you guys can get a point of comparison to other stamina DPS classes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So this particular build is kind of centered around maximizing single target DPS, so for trash pulls or maybe for some other fights, you might want to swap some sets out, and we will be going over some alternative sets here. So, starting off with our Monster Helm set, we are running Velidreths. It's still the strongest Monster Helm set in the game for stamina DPS and has not yet been replaced here. So you do need to have access to the Shadows of the Hiss DLC in order to grab this set because it does come from Cradle of Shadows. You'll notice that I do have a max health enchant here, and that's because we do need to run our Taeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Camoran Throne in order to sustain. We are not able to sustain on buy-stat food, unfortunately, so you do need to have that max health enchant on a large piece to kind of make up for that loss in health. For our body set, we're running Perfected Relequen. Still the strongest set in the game when it comes to pure single target DPS. Not going to be quite as strong for trash pulls, so just bear that in mind if you're wearing Relequen in trash pulls. The perfected version has additional max stamina on the 5-piece, the non-perfect version does not. The perfected version does come from Vet Cloud Rest plus 1, 2, and 3 though, so if you can't farm plus 1, plus 2, or plus 3, then you might need to stick with the imperfect version of Relequen, which is still very strong, you're just missing out on the max stamina bonus there. For our second front bar set, we are running Perfected Lokkestiiz. This comes from Sunspire. Perfected comes from Veteran Sunspire. Does not have to be hard mode, so non-hard mode boss fights are perfectly fine to get perfected. If you cannot do Vet, then the non-perfect version drops from normal Sunspire, much easier to obtain that way, and you do lose the weapon crit from that 5-piece there. So ideally you want to get the Perfected Lokkestiiz set, not the imperfect version, because the additional weapon crit is actually very important overall to your DPS here. So definitely try to get the perfected version if you can, but if you can't, non-perfect version is also perfectly fine to run. Then for our front bar, we have double daggers. You have sharpened on the main hand. You can also go with Nirn, just have to adjust your CPs accordingly. But definitely want to have sharpened on the offhand here. We are running double Ravage Health poisons here. These can be made using Fleshfly Larvae, Nightshade, and a Nirnroot. They did fix the bug where poisons were reducing the effectiveness of your back bar enchants, so now we can run poisons on the front bar here. And for our back bar, we have the Maelstrom Bow infused with a weapon damage enchant. For traits and enchant on our jewelry, we have 3 weapon damage and 3 Bloodthirsty. You can also go with Infused instead of Bloodthirsty for a more balanced DPS approach. But you're going to want to try to avoid it robust if you can, just because Infused is going to be stronger. You have more weapon damage modifiers than you have max stamina modifiers, so Infused gives you better results. For armor, all divines, and then we have that 1 health enchant on one of our large pieces, so that's either going to be your head, your chest, or your legs, but the rest are going to be max stamina enchants here. So now moving on to alternative sets, because these sets do require you to have access to certain DLCs and expansions. We're going to go through these in alphabetical order here, starting off with our dungeon sets here. So the one dungeon set that you're going to have to hold on to is going to be Leviathan. This is a base game set from Crypt of Hearts, which just adds straight up weapon crit. It does have a 1-piece max stamina bonus here. Very, very strong set. You can either run this on the body or the front bar set. It does have a static 5-piece bonus, but because it is weapon crit and run a stamina Nightblade that has a very dynamic rotation, Having this as a front bar set is not that big of a loss compared to some other potential classes or other potential rotations. Ideally though, you do want to have this on the body. Now, beyond that, there's not that many other dungeon sets in the game. The other one that you might want to hold on to is going to be Zogvin's Warband. This comes from Frostvault, so you do need to have access to the Raststone expansion to get this set here. The big bonus of Zogvin's is the 4-piece and the 5-piece. The 4-piece gives you additional physical penetration. The 5-piece acts as a slightly modified version of Advanced Yokeda. So Advanced Yokeda typically gives 2000 weapon crit at max stacks. Zogvin's gives 1290 weapon crit at max stats, so a little bit less weapon crit, but when you have max stacks you gain minor force. So this normally comes from Rearming Trap. So basically getting that minor force from Zogvin's allows you to use that global cooldown on another spamble, rapid strikes or surprise attack, which might end up giving you a little bit better DPS or basically negates the additional weapon crit bonus that Advanced Yokeda has over Zogvin's. Additional physical penetration also allows you to shift some points out of piercing and put them into other nodes, so you do get some additional damage back that way as well. Now, one set I do want to mention here is going to be Essence Thief. I have seen this tested out both in Trials and on the raid dummy itself. It was buffed in Elsweyr. So when you deal damage to the light attack, you draw essence from the enemy that pulls near them for 5 seconds. This basically looks like a rolling ball, and it does very close to the enemy now, close to the boss that it procs on. So it's actually a lot easier to get now than it was pre-Elsweyr. When you do collect it, all you have to do is just run through it. You get 3900 healing, 3900 stamina, and you get 10% additional damage done for 10 seconds. This can occur every 10 seconds, so theoretically you can get up to 100% uptime on Essence Thief here. Realistically, it's going to be lower just because you do have to move to grab that additional bonus there. It's a very nice set, very good for sustain overall. It does not deal quite as much damage as the other sets that I mentioned so far, but it is a pretty nice set overall if you're concerned about sustain at all and don't want to sacrifice too much when it comes to damage. It also comes, because it is a prop, you can wear it on the front bar set. There is a unique dagger that comes from the first boss, I believe, Harvest Dirk, I believe is what it's called. So if you want to run front bar sets and you want an easy dagger, you can just farm the first boss in White Gold Tower for the chance for that dagger drop. It's definitely a set that I wouldn't necessarily say farm for it, but I would say maybe have it on hand. It's a little bit better than what people make it out to be here. Moving on to overland sets, there aren't that many overland sets that are particularly useful or good to run on a stamina DPS. There's only really two. First one's going to be Spring and Thorns. This comes from Bankrai, so it's a base game set here, but it is not great for boss fights because in boss fights you typically will be able to get up to the penetration cap on your boss. So this is going to be useful for trash pulls, where you might not have major fracture up all the time from like a Stamina Warden Shulk ability or from a Necromancer's Unnerving Boneyard ability. So this basically gives you some nice penetration across all of the different mobs you might hit in a trash pull. The only other set that I want to mention here is going to be, where is it, Briarheart here. This is a Hrothgar set, so you can buy it off guild traders if you can't farm it, or you can farm it yourself. This is a proc set, so when you deal critical damage, you have a 10% chance to increase your weapon damage for 10 seconds, and while this effect is active, you also heal with every critical strike for 609 health. So in terms of overall uptime, this is comparable to Hunding's Rage in terms of raw weapon damage, but because it is a proc set, it does carry over to your back bar, so it does end up being a little bit stronger than Hunding's Rage due to that. Now for trial sets, there are two trial sets that you're going to want to have on hand here. First one's going to be, where is it? Twice-Fanged Serpent, also known as Twice-Fanged Snake. This comes from Sanctum Ophidia, so it is a base game set here. This basically gives you a bunch of physical penetration, so very similarly to Spriggan's. Not very useful for boss fights. It's going to be very, very powerful in trash pulls though. And then we have War Machine. So Nightblades do use Incapacitating Strike as their ultimate, so that costs 70 ultimate, the cheapest ultimate in the game. So War Machine has very good synergy with that. So when you use ultimate, you and your closest two allies within 28 meters of you gain Major Slayer for 10 seconds. So Stamina Nightblades can typically get between 40 to 45% uptime on War Machine. So this is pretty nice in 4-man content and in trials, well-organized trials group I should say, if you're able to consistently get this on the DPS. It also ends up being a strong trial set as well. Again, very great synergy with the Stamina Nightblade because of that cheap in-cap cost. Now for Monster Helm sets, there are a few Monster Helm sets that you're going to want to maybe use if you don't have access to Velidreth. So the first one is going to be Selene. So for those of you guys who don't have access to Velidreth, Selene is going to be your next best option. It comes from Selene's web. The proc damage itself, typically speaking, will usually end up being as good as Velidreth, maybe a little bit better. The one piece is not quite as strong. Max stamina is not as strong as weapon damage. The downside of Selene's too, if you want to compare it to Velidreth, is the fact that it can only hit one enemy. Velidreth, because it spawns up to 3 spores, can hit up to 3 enemies, or it can hit the same enemy 3 times if it has a large enough hitbox. So Velidreth is still stronger than Selene's, even though the proc damage from Selene's ends up being stronger than Velidreth if only one spore hits. The other monster set you might want to consider picking up is going to be Kra'gh. That's mainly because we did lose, where's Kra'gh? We did lose Minor Berserk on our bow proc, so due to that, we need to rely on our healers to give us Minor Berserk. If we cannot rely on our healers to give Minor Berserk, then we need to turn to Kra'gh instead. So if you're running something like Asylum, or your healers are just bad at giving out Minor Berserk in Combat Prayer, then you should run Kra'gh instead for the Minor Berserk, and give up Velidreth. So that's pretty much it for all of the gear stuff. So let's go over our character sheet. I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are one of the 2 best races in the game right now for stamina DPS. The other one is going to be the Orcs. Orcs get 2000 max stamina, 1000 max health, and they get 258 weapon damage. Dark Elves make a nice hybrid DPS if you want to play Magicka Nightblade at any point. They get 1875 Magicka stamina, and they get 258 spell and weapon damage. Moving on from there, you have 2 other races that might be good options here, and you have 1 hybrid race as well. So the 2 races, I like to call them the regen races or the sustain races. They are the Red Guards and the Wood Elves. Both races get 2000 max stamina, and they also get some form of sustain in their racial passives. So Red Guards, for example, get some stamina back when they deal direct damage, and then Bosmer get 258 stamina regen that is affected by things like CPs and other sort of buffs there. So overall, very nice to their overall sustain. Imperial are also an option if you have access to the Imperial Edition and can play as Imperials. They get 2000 stamina and health, so don't have to worry too much about health as you're playing Imperial. They also get 3% cost reduction to all abilities, and they get 333 all resources back whenever they deal direct damage every couple of seconds. So they also get a little bit of sustain bonus that way, and they do get some nice health. So if you also want to play a Nightblade tank, which are becoming more popular in Elsweyr, it's also a good option to play that. Then you have the Khajiit, which is a true hybrid class, or I should say hybrid race if you want to do a little bit of everything. They get 825 Magicka health and stamina, 85 Magicka regen, 85 stamina regen, 100 health regen, 10% additional critical healing done, and 10% additional critical damage done. So very balanced stats overall. They are a true master of all, jack of all trades, master of none race. For our attributes, we have 64 points into stamina. You can shift a few points into health if you'd like. We are running regen food, so either our Tam Takeaway Broth or Dubious Command Throw. So we might want to put a few points into health in order to get to a little bit safer levels when it comes to overall health. Right now, without minor toughness or Ebon, we're sitting at just shy of 15k, 15.9k or so. With toughness, as you'll see when we do a 21 million diamond parse, we'll be sitting at about 17.1k. But if you want to give yourself a little bit more padding, by all means, you can shift a few points into health that way. For our Munda Stone, we're going with the Shadow, still the strongest Munda Stone in the game right now for stamina DPS in general. Or a Vampire for the additional 10% stamina regen. Don't really need to do it as a Nightblade. Nightblades do have, generally speaking, better sustain than the other classes in the game. But it is still nice to have that little bit of additional cushion room there. You do need to be stage 2 in order to get that regen passive. I'm stage 3 here. You do get the additional Undeath passive, which is some additional damage mitigation when you're at low health. You do end up taking more damage from fire abilities though, and you are within melee range, so just bear that in mind. If there are mechanics that do have fire damage, you do have less time to react just because you are within melee range rather than at ranged. And then for food, we're using our Tam Takeaway Broth for the additional regen. You can also use Dubious Command Throne if you cannot afford to buy our Tam Takeaway Broth. Dubious Command Throne is slightly weaker and also lacks the health regen, so I would ideally recommend running our Tam Takeaway Broth if you can afford it or craft it yourself. Now for our skill bars. Starting with our front bar, we have Killer's Blade, Rapid Strikes, Rending Slashes, Relentless Focus, Rearming Trap, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. You can also use surprise attack instead of rapid strikes. DPS difference between the two of them is going to be very, very small. Rapid strikes does end up dealing just a hair more damage than surprise attack, but surprise attack does also give group-wide physical penetration as well. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS, you can get some additional DPS from surprise attack as long as you're able to flank the enemy. So flanking is either from the sides or from the rear. From our back bar, standard bread and butter, Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Leeching Strikes, Dark Shade, and Incapacitating Strike. So Dark Shade is the new ability that we're going to be using on our back bar here, and that's because they did change it in Elsweyr to scale off of your highest stat. Now it does deal magic damage, so it does not scale off of our physical penetration, it does not scale off of Mighty or any other of our CPs really, but it is still a really nice skill to have on hand. It also uses Magicka, so we do get back one global cooldown because it does use basically uses our secondary resource, so this does help out our overall sustain here. Moving on to our CP points, CP cap is still 810, so we still have 270 points on each of our constellation colors. For our green CPs, we have 100 Mooncalf and 75 in Tenacity. That gives us 95 remaining points. I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. You can shift your green CP points around a little bit. So, for example, you can take some points out of Mooncalf, drop it down to 75. You can increase Tenacity up to 100. You can even drop these down if you'd like even more. So it's kind of up to you where you wanted to put your green CPs. For our blue CPs, this is assuming that you're running double sharpened and you have all the debuffs in the game. So Infused Torch Crusher, Alkosh, Major Minor Fracture. If you're running something like Nirn main hand, sharpened offhand, or you're not anticipating good uptimes on your debuffs, you might want to shift some points into piercing from the other nodes. So I have 64 Mighty, 36 Piercing, 66 Precise Strikes, 48 Thaumaturge, and 56 into Master at Arms. Now, if we do need to put some more points into piercing, your next couple of jump points here are going to be for Master at Arms, 52 or 48, Thaumaturge, 44 or 40, Precise Strikes, 61 or 56, and Mighty, 56 or 41. That'll give you back quite a few points to put into piercing to make up for any sort of additional penetration you might need. Now, for our red CPs, this is a more generalist approach, so this will give you decent mitigation across every piece of content in the game, but it is not going to maximize your mitigation at any single piece of content, so you might want to shift some CP points around for any specific trial that you are running. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, 64 Hardy, 64 Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much it for all of the build information, so now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So the only big changes to our rotation compared to Wrathstone is we're using Rapid Strikes because that was buffed. We're also using Dark Shade because that was also buffed. Overall, the rotation remains exactly the same. So we still want to use our bow proc right away when we're in back bar. We do want to break our back bar rotation to get off any bow procs. And then your buff for bow procs does last 30 seconds, so this does end up meaning cast it less often. Even though it did lose minor endurance, it does end up being more or less a wash in terms of overall sustain here. So just keep that in mind. So for example, our general rotation, just pre-buff, lay down trap, do all of your back bar dots. Use your spam bow, whatever you choose to use here. So I'm just gonna keep going until we get to a point where I'm breaking the back rotation. So here I'm gonna end up breaking the back rotation to get the bow proc off like so, and then go back and finish off our back rotation. So that's what I mean when I say you might need to break your back rotation to use your bow proc, and because of this you will have a little bit of a dynamic rotation here. When it comes to incapacitating strike, you do want to try to use it right before you use the bow proc if you can. If you can't, not that big of a deal. You typically will only be able to get one bow proc off anyways per incapacitating strike that you use, but ideally you're going to want to use it and then go to your front bar and get that bow proc off that way. So that's pretty much how the rotation goes. Again, not that big of a change. The only change is the introduction of Dark Shade on the back bar. That's only really going to matter if you are still using Berserking Warrior from last patches. So this has been buffed. It lasts for 6 seconds now, so you can get 4 global cooldowns on the back bar. The issue is you might be running 5 or even 6 global cooldowns in the back bar. So we do have a dynamic rotation. You're still going to break your back bar rotation to get the bow proc off, so this shouldn't be that big of an issue, but it is something to keep in mind if you are still running Advanced Yokeda on the front bar here. So Advanced Yokeda is still a very strong set. It's just a heavy armor set, so it's a little bit less useful, or I should say less easy to get prepared than Perfected Lokkestiiz, because you do have to transmute it there. But if you don't have access to Sunspire, then you might end up using Berserking Warrior, Advanced Yokeda instead, because this is a base game set from Hellra's Citadel. So if you don't have Elsweyr, but you do have Somerset, for example, you can transmute the jewelry, so you would end up using this rather than Lokkestiiz. So we're going to do a 21 million dummy parse now, so you guys can get a point of comparison to the other DPS classes in the game. The only stamina class that you cannot really compare these parses to directly 1-to-1 is going to be the Stamina Necromancer. That's because Necromancers do have access to major vulnerability, so to compare to Necromancers you will have to either adjust those parses downward to account for the major vulnerability, or adjust your other parses upwards to kind of reflect the major vulnerability uptime on those Necromancer parses. We will try to narrate throughout this and also sort of include any sort of information that I might have missed in the first 20 minutes of this video. Let's go ahead and get started here. Remember, we are running Lokkestiiz on the front bar, so we do want to make sure we are getting those synergies off while we're on our front bar and not using them while we're on our back bar. It's going to take a little bit of discipline to do so, but in order to maximize your DPS, that's what you're going to want to have to do. Again, break a back bar rotation to get that bow proc off. When you have 4 bow things like this, you just want to swap your back bar light attack bow proc. A little bit slow on that one. So light attack bow proc instead of light attack ability. Again. Gonna rebuff bow proc here because we're also not gonna make it. We're gonna mess the rotation. That time I was a little bit slow on that, so I did end up activating synergy on the back bar there, so we will have a little bit lower DPS, but it shouldn't be that big of a difference. Now when we get to execute, instead of our spam bow, we will be using Kyo's Blade instead. And we do not need to maintain Relentless focus anymore. That's the bow proc buff. Execute, I'll explain that again. So you no longer need to worry about maintaining a bow proc at all. You do want to still maintain all the backbar stuff. You can also drop Rending slashes as well if you'd like. You do not need to use your bow proc anymore. I'm just gonna keep on executing here. Not worry about the dots too much. Alright, so there we go. That's the Stamina Nightblade. A little bit of a worse parse than I normally do. Actually, quite a bit worse. I've actually been able to pull 84k, but this particular parse was 81.8k. So mostly it was that missed Major Slayer uptime that could account for it. This will probably bring me up to about 82.9, high 82s, low 83s, but for the most part this was just poor execution on my part. Also I had poor crit chance, crit luck with Kriller's Blade, so a little bit of RNG factor here. Generally speaking though, Nightblades will be pulling a little bit higher. Like I said, I did manage to pull 84 earlier while I was trying out a couple of gear combinations here, so this is a combination of just poor execute crit chance as well as poor execution on my part with the taking Major Slayer on the back bar rather than the front bar. But beyond that, Nightblades are still very strong. Even though they have been surpassed by Stamina Necromancers, they're still a very, very strong class to play in endgame PvE content here. Don't take this parse for granted. Again, I have pulled higher, and if you guys take a look at things like ESO logs or what Lyco has pulled, then you can see that the Nightblade is definitely still among the top DPS classes in the game. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about this build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.